I drove 2 hours to surprise my boyfriend, but what I found didn't add up. I never expected something as simple as a surprise visit to completely unravel my relationship, but that's exactly what happened, and even now I still find myself replaying it in my head, trying to understand where things actually started to go wrong, or if there were signs I just didn't want to see at the time because everything felt so normal from my side. We were both 19, first-year university students, doing long distance between two cities that were roughly 2 hours apart. It wasn't perfect, but it also didn't feel unstable. If anything, it felt like we had adjusted to it better than most couples we knew. The distance became part of the relationship routine, something we worked around instead of something that separated us. We had done the drive so many times that it stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like familiarity, like something you just did because you cared. So when my class got canceled one day, I didn't really overthink what I was doing. I just had this simple idea in my head that I wanted to surprise him. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious, just something thoughtful, something that would make him smile when he saw me. I even remember stopping to pick up a few small things on the way, nothing expensive or over the top, just little details to make the moment feel more intentional, more special. At that point, I genuinely thought I was doing something good for the relationship, something he would appreciate. I remember feeling excited the entire drive. Not anxious, not uncertain, just excited. I was imagining his reaction, how he'd probably laugh, maybe act a little surprised, then pull me in for a hug and say I should have told him I was coming. It felt like one of those small relationship memories you'd look back on later and smile about. But that version of the day ended the moment I arrived at his dorm. The first thing that threw me off wasn't anything dramatic at first, just something small that didn't fully make sense in my head. His car was still parked outside. I assumed he would be inside because that's what everything suggested at the time, but something about it didn't immediately line up with the expectation I had built on the drive over. If he was there, I should have been able to just go in and surprise him like planned. So I messaged his roommate, just casually asking if I could let myself in quietly so I didn't ruin the surprise. And that's when everything shifted without me really realizing it yet. His roommate replied almost immediately and told me my boyfriend wasn't there. He said he had already left for San Diego for the week. I remember just standing there reading that message over and over again because it didn't make sense. Not emotionally at first, but logically. It didn't match anything I knew. He had never mentioned San Diego. Not even once. Not even in passing. And definitely not in a way that involved leaving without telling me. That was the first moment I felt something slightly uncomfortable in my stomach, but I still hadn't fully connected it to anything yet. So I called him. He answered fairly quickly, and I tried to keep my tone normal when I asked where he was. There was a pause before he responded, just long enough that I noticed it immediately. Then he said he was still in Tempe getting things together, that he was going on a boys' trip. I remember nodding slightly as if that would help me process it better, even though I was just standing in a parking lot alone, trying to make sense of two completely different versions of reality forming in real time. Then I told him something that changed the entire tone of the conversation. I said I was actually at his dorm. There was a pause after that. Longer this time. And when he spoke again, everything about his voice had shifted. There was no surprise, no confusion, no reaction that matched what I had just said. He just responded with, "Oh, that's nice." And I still remember how wrong that sounded in the moment. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the lack of anything behind them. No emotion, no urgency, no question about why I was there. Just flat, almost too controlled. I asked him if he could come back for just a minute, just so I could see him since I had driven all the way there, and he refused immediately. No hesitation. He said they were already on the highway and it wasn't possible, and that I should just go home. And the way he said it made it feel final, like the conversation wasn't meant to continue beyond that point. When the call ended, I just stood there for a moment trying to process what had just happened, because something about it didn't sit right with me at all. It wasn't dramatic enough to be obvious, but it was inconsistent enough that I couldn't ignore it either. And I don't fully know why, but I checked his location. That was the moment things started to shift properly. He wasn't on a highway. He wasn't moving at all. He was still near campus, just sitting there, completely stationary. And suddenly I was staring at something that didn't match anything I had just been told. That was the point where doubt stopped being a vague feeling and started becoming something heavier, something I couldn't easily push away anymore. I called a couple of his friends after that, thinking maybe I was missing context, maybe there was a simple explanation, maybe I was just reacting emotionally because I had made the trip and it hadn't gone the way I expected. But every single one of them told me the same thing. San Diego, already left, boys' trip, planned, same structure, same wording, same certainty. And what unsettled me wasn't just what they were saying, but how similar it all sounded, like none of them were actually explaining it in their own words. It felt rehearsed in a way I didn't fully understand at the time. That's when the feeling started to change from confusion into something closer to unease. Because either I was completely misreading everything, or something was being kept from me on purpose. I tried to calm myself down. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself I was just hurt because I had made the effort and he wasn't there. I told myself there was probably a simple explanation I just didn't know yet. But the problem was that my instincts weren't calming down. They were getting louder. And eventually, I made a decision I didn't fully think through at the time. I got back in the car, and I drove to Imperial Beach, to his family's house. The entire drive felt different from anything I had experienced before. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just tense in a way I can't fully explain. Like I was moving towards something I didn't fully want to confirm, but also couldn't turn away from anymore. And even then, I still didn't know what I was expecting to find. Part of me still believed I would get there and everything would suddenly make sense again, that I would feel silly for even worrying. But when I arrived, everything looked completely normal. Too normal. Lights on, quiet atmosphere, nothing unusual, except for one detail: 2 surfboards outside near the entrance. One of them was his, the other wasn't. And I remember just standing there looking at them longer than I should have, because that was the first physical thing that didn't fit into any version of the story I had been trying to build. I walked up to the door slowly. I remember feeling detached at that point, like I was just moving because my body had already decided before my mind fully caught up. I opened the door and stepped inside. At first it was quiet. Then I heard voices upstairs. Normal voices, casual, light laughter. And that contrast made my stomach drop slightly because it didn't match what I had been feeling since the moment I left campus. I went upstairs. I don't even fully remember deciding to at that point. I just remember moving. The door was slightly open, and when I looked inside, I saw him. And a girl I had never seen before. They both looked up at the same time. And everything stopped. No movement, no sound, just silence holding the moment in place. Then he stood up quickly, and the first thing he said was, "What are you doing here?" Not concern, not shock, not relief that I was safe after a 2-hour drive, just defensiveness. And that single sentence changed something in me that I couldn't undo afterwards. He immediately started explaining, too fast, saying she was just a friend, that she needed somewhere to stay, that nothing was going on. But the explanation kept shifting slightly every time he spoke, like it wasn't fully formed and he was building it in real time under pressure. The girl didn't really say anything. She just stood there awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, like she hadn't expected to be part of any of this. I asked him why nobody told me, why his friends all gave the same story, why he had lied. And eventually he said it was because he knew I would freak out. That one line stayed with me more than anything else, because it meant he had already made a decision about my reaction before I ever had a chance to respond, and used that assumption to justify keeping me in the dark. I called his sister after that because I needed someone else there in that moment, someone outside of everything to ground what was happening. When she arrived, the atmosphere shifted immediately. She looked confused at first, then serious, and then she said something that completely changed everything again. "You told us you were alone here." And suddenly, it wasn't just my version of events anymore. It was conflicting stories inside the same family, and none of them aligned cleanly anymore. After that, the girl left quietly without much explanation, just disappearing from the situation entirely. And what was left behind was silence again. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. He kept insisting nothing happened, that he didn't cheat, that it wasn't what it looked like. But at that point, it wasn't even about proving anything anymore. It was about the fact that I couldn't trust what I was hearing. And once that trust breaks, there isn't really a version of the relationship that feels stable anymore, no matter how much you want it to. So I left. And I told myself that was it this time, that I had seen enough, that whatever I had just walked away from didn't need any more of my attention or energy, because at that point it had already taken more out of me than I even realized while it was happening. But the problem was, the more I tried to distance myself from it, the less it stopped replaying in my head, especially the parts that didn't fully make sense, like the way things escalated so quickly, the way everyone seemed to be on the same page, and the feeling that I had walked into something that had already been in motion long before I arrived. And I couldn't shake the thought that I hadn't actually seen everything. Not properly. So the next day I went back. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't message him. I just drove there again, almost automatically, like I needed to physically confirm what my head was already refusing to let go of, even though part of me knew it was a bad idea the moment I started the journey. When I arrived, the house looked the same as before, but quieter in a way that immediately made my stomach tighten, like it was trying too hard to act normal after what had happened the day before. I stood outside for a moment longer than I should have, just looking at it, trying to convince myself I was being ridiculous for coming back at all, because normal people don't do this. Normal situations don't require this level of second-guessing. But I still went in. The front door wasn't locked, which instantly set something off in my head, because after everything that had happened, it didn't feel careless. It felt intentional, like nothing had been adjusted since I left. I went upstairs again, slower this time, and I already knew where I was going without really thinking about it, which made the whole thing feel even worse. Like I wasn't discovering something new anymore. I was just returning to the exact same moment I couldn't process properly the first time. His room door was slightly open. Again. And I remember standing there for a few seconds, just staring at it, because my body already felt that same pressure from before, like it was warning me not to go in, not to repeat it, not to put myself back into whatever this was. But I still pushed the door open. And the second I stepped inside, I froze, because there was a second phone on the bed, just sitting there, right in plain sight, not hidden, not tucked away, not even slightly out of view, just lying there like it belonged in the room in a way that didn't match anything I had been told or anything I understood about him. For a second, I didn't even move. I just stared at it, trying to make sense of why it was there, because nothing about it felt accidental, and the longer I looked at it, the more my stomach just dropped. Then I walked over and picked it up, and I remember my hands were shaking slightly at that point, not dramatically, just enough that I noticed it, because I already knew I was crossing into something I couldn't unsee once I started. The screen was unlocked, which made everything feel even worse. I went straight into the messages without thinking too much about it, almost like my brain had already decided I didn't need to hesitate anymore. And what I saw wasn't just random conversations or harmless chatting, it was threads of messages going back, structured conversations, names I didn't recognize, and references that immediately made my chest tighten because they were clearly talking about me. There were messages about keeping stories consistent, messages about sticking to what was said, messages warning not to let anything slip if I showed up again. And then the one that really made everything in my body go cold, a message referring to me coming over before I even arrived the first time, like it had already been anticipated, discussed, and planned around. I remember just standing there in silence, reading it over and over, because at that point it wasn't confusion anymore. It was confirmation that I had been reacting inside something that was already being controlled from the other side. And while I was still holding the phone, trying to process what I was seeing, I heard footsteps outside the room. Slow, getting closer. And my entire body just went still because I didn't even know who was about to walk in on me or what version of this situation I was about to be forced into next. The door started opening, and I didn't move. But when it fully opened, it wasn't him. It was his sister. And she just looked at me. Not surprised, not confused, just aware, like she had already walked into this exact moment in her head before it physically happened. There was a long pause where neither of us spoke, and I remember still holding the phone in my hand, completely unsure of what she had seen, what she knew, or what she was about to say. And then she finally spoke, very quietly, almost like she didn't want anyone else in the house to hear. She said, "I knew you'd come back." And that hit me in a way I can't really explain properly because it didn't feel like she was reacting to what I had found. It felt like she already knew this would reach this point, like none of this had been as spontaneous or messy as I thought it was, just already in motion. I didn't say anything. I couldn't, really. I just put the phone back down on the bed, stepped away from it, and looked at her for a moment, trying to decide if there was anything left in this situation that would actually make it clearer. But there wasn't. So I turned around, walked out of the room, down the stairs, and out of the house without another word. And this time, I didn't go back. When I got home, I blocked him on everything, his number, social media, every way he could possibly reach me, because at that point it didn't feel like there was anything left to understand that would actually change what I had already seen. And I never spoke to him again after that.